Was 54 years old when I finally understood why everything I thought I knew about money was only half of the truth. Not wrong, exactly, just incomplete in a way that mattered enormously, in a way that had been costing me and the people I worked with more than any of us had calculated. I had spent 2 decades by that point advising people on their finances, watching patterns repeat themselves with a consistency that should have told me something. People who earned well and saved little. People who saved faithfully and still felt financially fragile. People who did everything the textbooks suggested and arrived at 60 feeling like they had missed something important, though they could never quite say what. The answer came to me not in a boardroom or a seminar, but sitting across from a man named Leonard at a diner table in the autumn of 2001. Leonard was 67. He had retired 2 years earlier from a career in manufacturing management. Solid career, decent pension, modest savings. By conventional measures, he was fine. Not wealthy, but fine. And yet he had come to me because something felt wrong about his financial life in a way he could not articulate, and I had agreed to meet him as a favor to a mutual friend. He talked for almost an hour before I said very much at all, about decisions he had made, about things he wished he had done differently, about the strange feeling of having worked faithfully for 30 years and arrived at a destination that felt less like freedom and more like a slightly smaller version of the constraint he had always lived inside. And at some point, I remember exactly when, because I put down my coffee cup and did not pick it up again, he said something that changed the way I thought about every conversation I had ever had about money. He said, "I always thought financial security was something that happened to you if you did enough right things. I never thought of it as something you had to design." I have been thinking about that sentence for more than 20 years, because it describes, with an accuracy I could not have manufactured myself, the single most important distinction between the people I have watched build genuine financial peace in their 50s and 60s and the people who continued to feel financially uncertain despite years of honest effort. The ones who found peace were not the ones who earned the most, or who got luckiest with their investments, or who somehow stumbled into the right opportunities. They were the ones who understood, at some point, that financial security is not a destination you arrive at by accumulating enough. It is a structure you build, deliberately and specifically, out of a small number of principles that most people understand intellectually and almost nobody actually uses. What I want to share with you is the story of how I came to understand those principles, not as abstract ideas, but as living realities that I watched transform the financial lives of real people, including people who had started far later than they wished and who still managed to build something that surprised them with its solidity and its calm. The first thing I had to understand, the thing that Leonard's words forced me to confront, was that most people manage money reactively. They earn, they spend, they save what is left, and they repeat this cycle indefinitely, making adjustments at the edges, but never questioning the fundamental structure of how money moves through their lives. And the problem with reactive money management is not that it produces disaster. It is that it produces mediocrity, a financial life that is always slightly less than it could have been, always slightly more anxious than the numbers would seem to warrant, always oriented toward responding to what has already happened rather than shaping what comes next. The shift I watched transform financial lives, the shift that Leonard was describing without quite knowing it, was the move from reactive to intentional, from managing what is left to directing what arrives, from letting financial outcomes happen and then responding to them, to deciding in advance what the money will do and building structures that make that decision automatic. It sounds simple. It is not easy. But the gap between people who make that shift and people who do not is, in my experience, the largest gap in personal finance. Larger than the gap between high earners and modest earners. Larger than the gap between people who got good investment returns and people who did not. The intentionality gap is the one that matters most, and it is almost never discussed. I saw this most clearly in two women I worked with in the mid-2000s, both of whom had come to me at around the same time, both in their early 50s, both with similar income levels and similar amounts saved. Their situations were, on paper, nearly identical. But within 5 years, their financial trajectories had diverged completely. And the reason had nothing to do with luck or opportunity or any external factor I could point to. One of them, I will call her Patricia, continued to manage her money the way she always had, earning, spending, saving the remainder, adjusting when something went wrong. She was not careless. She was thoughtful and well-intentioned, and she worked hard. But her financial life remained reactive, and reactive financial lives do not accumulate the way intentional ones do. The other woman, I will call her Ruth, did something that took her about one afternoon to implement and that changed everything. She sat down and made 3 decisions in advance. She decided what percentage of every dollar she earned would go directly to savings before she had any opportunity to spend it. She decided which of her ongoing expenses were genuinely serving her life and which were simply habits she had never examined. And she decided that she would review her financial position once a quarter, calmly and honestly, regardless of what she found. 3 decisions, made once, implemented automatically, never renegotiated in the moment of convenience or discomfort. Within 5 years, the financial gap between Patricia and Ruth, who had started at the same place, was significant enough to alter the shape of their retirements entirely. Not because Ruth had earned more, because she had designed. What Ruth had discovered, without using this language, was that the consistency of a system beats the intensity of effort every time. Patricia worked harder at her finances than Ruth did in any given month. She thought about money more, worried about it more, made more individual decisions about it. But effort without structure is exhausting, and exhaustion leads to the very shortcuts and compromises that undo the effort. A system, a set of automatic behaviors that execute without requiring willpower, removes the exhaustion. It removes the daily negotiation. It makes the right financial behavior the default behavior, and it makes every alternative require active effort to pursue. This is what I could not see clearly before Leonard's words reoriented my thinking, and what I have watched play out in hundreds of conversations since. Financial security is not the reward for financial effort. It is the reward for financial design. And design, unlike effort, is available to anyone who is willing to make a small number of decisions once and then protect those decisions against the continuous pull of short-term convenience. What those decisions need to address, what the design needs to include, became clearer to me over the decade that followed that conversation with Leonard. I watched people succeed and watched people struggle, and the patterns were not subtle. The people who built real security in their 50s and 60s were doing a handful of things that the others were not. They were keeping a meaningful percentage of their income before it had any opportunity to become spending. They were treating assets and expenses as genuinely different categories and building their financial life around the distinction. They were acting on good financial decisions immediately, rather than waiting for perfect conditions that would never arrive. They were investing in their own financial understanding with the same seriousness they brought to any other professional development. And they were building the system before trusting the willpower, automating the right behaviors before congratulating themselves on their discipline. None of these things is complicated to understand. The understanding is not the obstacle. The obstacle is the gap between understanding and implementation, and that gap is wider than it looks because it is protected by comfort. The current financial life, however insufficient, is familiar. Changing it requires confronting things that are uncomfortable to look at directly. The subscriptions you have been paying for years without examining whether they still serve you. The insurance coverage you set up in a different season of your life and never updated. The interest rate on the savings account you chose for its safety and never revisited to ask whether it was actually keeping pace with the world. Comfort protects all of these from examination, and examination is the only thing that changes them. Leonard, it turned out, had not come to me for advice about investments or tax strategies or retirement income planning. He had come because he needed someone to sit across from him and confirm what he already knew but had not been able to say clearly. That the financial life he had was not the financial life he could have had, and that the difference was not bad luck or insufficient income. It was the absence of design. He had worked faithfully inside a reactive system for 30 years, and the reactive system had given him a reactive outcome, something adequate, something functional, something that would hold, but not the thing he had imagined when he thought about the years ahead. He made changes, not dramatic ones. He was 67, and the time for dramatic changes had passed, and he knew it. But he made the decisions that could still be made, redirected what could still be redirected, built the structure that could still be built in the years that remained. And 2 years later, when I ran into him at a coffee shop near his home and asked how things were, he said something that I have repeated more times than I can count in the years since. He said, "I wish I had done it at 52, but I am glad I did it at 67. Because even 2 years of living in a designed financial life feels completely different from 30 years of living in one that just happened." That is what I want for you. Not perfection, not a dramatic transformation that requires you to become a different person or a financial expert overnight. Just the shift from happening to designing, from reacting to deciding, from letting the financial life accumulate the way weather accumulates, randomly, without intention, shaped entirely by whatever comes, to building it the way you would build anything that matters, deliberately, with a clear picture of what it needs to do, with structures that make the right behaviors automatic and the wrong behaviors require active effort to pursue. You are 50 or 55 or 60, and you have time. Less time than you had at 35, and every year from this point forward matters more than the year before. But you have time. And the only question that matters, the question I want you to sit with before you close this video, is not whether you understand what I have described today. The question is whether you are going to design it, or whether you are going to continue to let it happen. Leave me your answer in the comments. Tell me where you are. Tell me what one decision you are going to make today, not next month, not when the time feels right, but today, to begin the shift from happening to designing. I read every comment, and I think the conversation that starts there might be the most valuable part of what we have shared today.